Silence that followed was the kind that changes the air in a room. He kept his eyes on the Eve he'd been reinforcing, the one above the door of Callard's bakery, which had been sagging since October and which nobody in Stonebridge had bothered to fix because nobody in Stonebridge believed Imogen Callard was planning to stay. She was 26. He was 44. He knew exactly what he'd just said. "Why 10?" she asked. He looked at her then because he had no choice. She wasn't embarrassed. She was standing there with a stripe of white paint across her left wrist and an expression somewhere between amused and genuinely curious. "I don't follow," he said, though he did. "Why 10 years younger?" Imogen tilted her head. "You're not that old." Gideon stepped down from the ladder. He was not the kind of man who lost his footing in conversations, but this one had caught him completely off guard. "I'm old enough to know better." "Then what?" He didn't answer. He picked up his level and checked the Eve he'd just reinforced, though it didn't need checking. Imogen went back to the trim without making it strange, which somehow made it stranger. "Before we go any further, though, I want to ask you something. Do you think age truly matters when two people recognize something real in each other? Leave your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely love to know your thoughts. Now, let's get back to Gideon and Imogen. Gideon Ashworth had come back to Stonebridge, Ontario, 18 months ago, after selling the development firm he'd built over 15 years in Toronto. Most people in town assumed he'd come back to retire. He was 43 at the time, and they said so in the way people in small towns say things, not unkindly but plainly. "Early retirement, then. That's good for you, Gideon." He didn't correct them. The truth was more complicated. He'd built the firm with his wife, Caroline, and when she died of a sudden illness 3 years before, staying in the office they'd shared felt like a form of punishment he hadn't earned. Selling wasn't giving up. It was the only honest thing left to do. He'd returned to the old Ashworth property on the edge of Stonebridge and spent the better part of a year fixing it up with his own hands. It was the kind of work that suited him. Physical, clear, with a definite outcome, unlike most of what he felt. Imogen Callard had arrived in Stonebridge 6 weeks before Gideon noticed her, which was unusual because Stonebridge had a population of just under 2,000, and people noticed everything. She'd come to take over her late grandmother's bakery, a narrow 2-story building on the main street with a hand-painted sign and a reputation for the best butter tarts in Lanark County. The bakery had debts, the building needed work, and Imogen, who had spent 4 years working in corporate finance in Ottawa, had walked away from all of it to be here. People said she wouldn't last the winter. Gideon had watched from across the street for 3 weeks before he offered to fix the Eve, and by then he already knew she would. Now she was 3 feet away with paint on her wrist, and he had just told her he might have asked her to dinner. "You don't have to pretend you didn't say it," she offered. She was finishing the trim line with the careful attention she gave everything, and it struck him, not for the first time, that she was remarkably unbothered by things that would make most people uncomfortable. "I know," he said. "Good." She stepped back to assess the trim, because it was a nice thing to say, even if you followed it up with something strange. Strange how? The 10 years part. She looked at him sidelong. "You're not 34 trying to date a 26-year-old. You're 44. That's a different thing." "Is it?" "Yes," she said, the way she said most things, as a fact, not a performance. "Come inside. I'll make coffee." He followed her in, because refusing would have been stranger than going. The bakery smelled like browned butter and cardamom. The front counter was new. Imogen had refinished it herself with reclaimed oak, but everything else was original. From the pressed tin ceiling to the glass front display cases her grandmother had bought secondhand in the 70s. On the back wall, framed in mismatched wood, were photographs spanning 5 decades of the Callard family in Stonebridge. Gideon stood looking at one photograph while Imogen ran the espresso machine her grandmother had never owned. A younger version of the building, 2 people standing out front, shaking hands, sometime in the late 70s. The man on the left had Gideon's jaw and posture. "Is that my father?" he said. Imogen turned. "Where?" He pointed. She came around the counter and they stood side by side looking at the image, a man he recognized, a woman who must have been family to Imogen, though perhaps not her grandmother, an aunt, maybe, by the age. I don't know who that is, Imogen said honestly. Gran never labeled them. That's Harold Ashworth, Gideon said. My father. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Small world, she said finally, and went back to the coffee. They didn't discuss it further that afternoon. But Gideon thought about it all the way home. His father's hand extended towards someone from her family. Some kind of agreement, or greeting, or both. He filed it away and told himself it probably didn't matter. The following week, a black SUV parked in front of Callard's at 9 in the morning, and a man in a sport coat stepped out. He was around 35, effortlessly polished in the way that comes from a certain kind of upbringing. He carried a portfolio instead of a briefcase, which Gideon noted as somehow worse. His name, Imogen would later tell him, was Drew Fenton, a representative from a private property group in Ottawa that had been acquiring parcels along the county road for the past 2 years. They were assembling a heritage tourism corridor, boutique accommodation, a culinary trail, artisan markets. The bakery was the anchor parcel they hadn't been able to secure. Drew laid it all out on Imogen's refinished counter with the quiet confidence of someone who had made this kind of offer before. The number was fair. More than fair, actually. Imogen could pay off the building's debts, walk away with real capital, and return to Ottawa without anyone thinking less of her for it. She listened to the entire presentation without interrupting. Then she said, "I'm not selling." Drew blinked. "Miss Callard. The bakery's been in my family since 1961. My grandmother left it to me because she believed I'd carry it forward." Imogen folded her arms over the counter. "I intend to." Drew recovered smoothly. "The offer is open for 30 days. I hope you'll take time to consider it properly." "I will," she said. "I just told you the answer." By that afternoon, all of Stonebridge knew about the offer. By evening, 2 camps had formed. Those who thought Imogen should be practical, and those who thought she was doing the right thing. Doris Mack, who ran the dry goods shop, told 3 separate people she suspected Imogen was only holding out because of Gideon Ashworth. Funny how she always needs something repaired. Funny how he keeps showing up. The implication wasn't kind, but it wasn't subtle either. Gideon heard that version. He didn't visit the bakery for 4 days. When he came back, on the pretext of finishing a section of the rear fence she'd mentioned weeks ago, Imogen handed him coffee without preamble and said, "I heard what Doris said." "I'm sorry," he said. "Why? You didn't say it." She leaned against the doorframe. "Though I notice you went quiet for 4 days, so." "I didn't want to give people more to talk about." "Did that work?" she asked. He looked at her. "No." "Right." She pushed off the doorframe. "Come help me with the fence, Gideon." He did. And that afternoon, when they'd finished and were sitting on the back step with lemonade, because the day had turned unseasonably warm for October, she told him about an old tin box she'd found in the crawl space while clearing in the spring. Inside were letters, receipts, and a single handwritten document she hadn't understood and had set aside for later. "What kind of document?" he asked. "Some kind of agreement," she said. "It has both our family names on it." They found it together the following morning. It was a partnership agreement dated 1978 between her grandmother, Vera Callard, and Gideon's father, Harold Ashworth, outlining shared use of a rear lot running between the 2 properties. More than that, it specified that neither family would sell, subdivide, or transfer their property without the written consent of the other. Gideon read it twice. "Did your grandmother ever mention this?" Imogen asked. "No." He set the paper down carefully. "And my father? He never talked about it either." "What does it mean?" "It means Drew Fenton's offer has a complication. If this agreement is valid, the bakery property can't be sold without an Ashworth's consent." He paused. "And the Ashworth property can't be sold without a Callard's." Imogen was quiet for a moment. "So we're tied together." "Legally, it appears that way." She looked at the document. "Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet," he said honestly. That was when Drew Fenton knocked on the bakery door. He had done his own research. A reference to the 1978 agreement had surfaced in municipal records, and he'd come back not to withdraw his offer, but to understand what they were dealing with. He was straightforward about it, which Gideon had to admit he respected. "If the agreement holds," Drew said, "we can't close on this property without your sign-off, Mr. Ashworth. which means the two of you would need to decide this together. He looked from one to the other. I'll give you time. He left without pressing. The room felt different after he was gone. Gideon found reasons not to visit for 3 days after that. Then 5. Then a week. Drew came back twice more that week, each time with a clarifying question that could have been handled by email. The second time he brought pastries from a bakery in Perth, a gesture so clearly calculated that Imogen called it out directly and he laughed and admitted it. She laughed too. That was the part Gideon saw through the window on his way past. He told himself it meant nothing. He found himself checking whether her lights were on across the street. He drove past at 6 in the morning twice in 1 week to confirm she was opening up, which he had no reasonable explanation for and which he did not examine closely. On a Thursday night, a line of storms rolled in from the west. By 11 o'clock the power was out in half of Stonebridge, and a spruce had come down across the road behind Callard's, blocking the rear exit. Gideon was there before he'd fully decided to go. He found Imogen in the kitchen by candlelight, calmly covering the dough she'd had proofing for morning. She looked up when she heard him come in through the unlocked side door and said, without surprise, "You're here." "The tree," he said, holding up the chainsaw. "I'll clear it." "In this? It's just rain." She considered him in the candlelight for a moment, then said, "Give me a minute." She came out with him. She held the light. They didn't talk much over the noise of the storm, but she stayed the whole time. When he finished and they came back inside and she made tea on the gas burner, something about it felt different from every conversation they'd managed to have before. "Drew asked me to dinner," she said. Gideon wrapped his hands around the mug. "He's a good man." "I know." She looked directly at him. "I said no." He didn't ask why. She could see that he wanted to and that he wouldn't. "You do this," she said. "Do what?" "Wait for me to give you information so you don't have to ask for it. Then you don't respond to it." She set her mug down. "You've been doing it since October." "Imogen." "I said no to dinner because I don't want to have dinner with Drew Fenton." She held his eyes. "And you know why, Gideon. You have known for a long time." The rain hammered the roof. He looked at his tea. "Say something," she said. "You're 26. I'm aware. I'm 44. Also aware. People will talk. They already are." She leaned forward slightly. "Doris Mack has opinions. The whole town has opinions. They had opinions about me keeping this bakery too, and I'm still here." She gestured around the kitchen. "I don't need you to protect me from other people's opinions, Gideon. I need you to stop finding reasons to leave before anything real actually starts." He looked at her for a long time. "I don't want to get this wrong," he said finally. "Then, don't. It's not that simple." "When you said that thing about 10 years, she said carefully, "on the ladder, what were you actually trying to say?" He didn't answer right away. She waited. "That I'd noticed you," he said. "That I had been noticing you for longer than made sense, and that I didn't know what to do with it." Imogen let out a slow breath. "That is the most honest thing you've said to me." "I know. So say the rest of it." He didn't. He left when the storm let up, and she didn't stop him, and she spent 2 days furious at herself for not stopping him. On the third morning, she walked across to the Ashworth property herself. She found him on the back porch with coffee and a rolled survey map, which meant he was planning something. And then she saw that the truck was loaded with equipment, in a way that suggested he was planning to leave for more than a day. "Where are you going?" she said. He looked up. He hadn't expected her, but he had the grace not to pretend he didn't know why she was there. "There's a project up near Renfrew, old mill building. They need a structural assessment." "For how long?" "A few weeks." She looked at the truck. She looked at him. "You're running." "I'm working." "You're working at 6:30, because if you leave before I notice, it doesn't count as running." She came up the porch steps. "I have spent 3 months letting you set the pace of this, letting you decide how close is close enough, when we talk, when we don't. I'm not going to beg you to stay, because that's not who I am. But I'm going to say this once, clearly, so you know exactly what you're choosing to walk away from." He went still. "You are the most genuinely decent person I have met in a long time," Imogen said. You showed up for me without being asked. You fixed things I hadn't even identified as broken yet. You never once made me feel like keeping this bakery was a foolish idea, or like I was too young to know my own mind. And every single time something real almost happened between us, you found a way to put distance back. Because you have decided, on your own without asking me, that you are not a reasonable choice for me to make. Gideon's jaw was tight. I'm being realistic. You are being a coward, she said. And I think you know it. Because the man who climbed a ladder in October to fix a stranger's eve and came out in a thunderstorm at midnight with a chainsaw, that man does not do things halfway. He was very quiet. So, her voice was steady. Either tell me I'm wrong about all of it, or tell me the truth and load your truck and let me watch you drive away knowing exactly what it is you're choosing. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he said, the photograph. My father and your grandmother. What about it? They weren't just shaking hands. He looked at her. I found letters when I went through my father's things, after you told me about the agreement. They wrote to each other for almost 20 years, real letters. They were good friends. His voice had gone rough. He used to say that the best business decision he ever made was one that also turned out to be the right thing to do. I never understood what he meant until this year. Imogen waited. I don't know how to do this correctly, Gideon said. Since Caroline, I haven't let anyone near enough to get it wrong with. I'm not asking you to do it correctly, she said. I'm asking you to do it honestly. He looked at her for what felt like a long time. Then he picked up the survey map, rolled it closed, and set it down on the railing. The mill project can wait, he said. The partnership agreement held up. A property lawyer in Perth confirmed it was valid and enforceable, which meant the development group couldn't close on either property without the cooperation of both families. Drew Fenton came by one final time, and Gideon was there when he did. Drew shook Gideon's hand, then turned to Imogen and said quietly that he thought she'd made the right call, meaning the bakery, but meaning something else as well. She thanked him, and meant it. Frank Okafor from the hardware store organized an unofficial renovation crew one Saturday that nobody had asked for, and which Gideon accepted without argument because the bakery's back wall genuinely needed insulation before January. Doris Mack revised her theory about Imogen twice before landing on a version that was almost accurate. On a Tuesday in late November, with the first real snow of the season coming down outside the window, Imogen and Gideon had dinner at the kitchen table in the bakery. The pressed tin ceiling overhead caught the light the same way it had for 60 years. On the back wall, among the old photographs, she'd added one she'd printed and framed herself. Harold Ashworth and Vera Callard, 1978, shaking hands in front of a door that both families had, in their own way, kept from closing. Gideon looked at it for a moment. They'd find this funny. I think they'd find it completely logical, Imogen said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His touch was careful, the way it was with everything he chose to do, considered, deliberate, certain once it was made. I'm not going to apologize for taking the time, he said. But I am sorry for the parts where I made it about the wrong things. I know, she said. Don't do it again. He smiled, which was still one of the rarer things he did, and therefore one of the more valuable ones. Outside, the snow settled on the main street of Stonebridge, and the light in Callard's bakery was warm and visible all the way to the end of the block. The way it had been in one form or another for 63 years, and the way Gideon Ashworth had quietly made certain it would continue to be,